Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. I am Manzoor al-Haq, moderator of this event, which is quite important considering the developments we are witnessing in eastern part of Europe. Our guest speaker today is Dr. Ihor Kharchenko, who is an academic turned diplomat. Is it hearable? Academic turned diplomat. Yes, okay. And Dr. Kharchenko, he has his PhD in history of international relations. So, of course, he is now witnessing twist and turn of international relations in his own country. And he joined foreign ministry after Ukraine became independent. And before that, he was a professor at Kiev State University. And since then, since joining the Foreign Office, he has served abroad for many years, including Romania, Poland, and the UK. And in 2013, he was posted to Japan, where he's serving till now. And we all know what is happening in Ukraine these days, that there was a referendum in Crimea yesterday, and which international community in general has not accepted as a legitimate one. And also at the United Nations, Russia has already vetoed a resolution condemning Russian interference in Crimea and in Ukraine. So Dr. Kharchenko will speak all about this and the development in his country and what he expects from international community and particularly from Japan. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to give a warm welcome to Dr. Ihor Kharchenko.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, dear members of Foreign Correspondents Club, it is my pleasure to be here. It coincided that the meeting was scheduled before, but it happened to just occur immediately after what the chairman called the referendum in Crimea, and I will start outright with the fact that please be sure that no referendum had taken place in Crimea. I mean, from legal grounds, both Ukrainian, international, what had happened cannot be called a referendum. Crimea was, is, and will be a part of Ukraine. And that is the simple fact which we should not overlook. Yes, the current development, which started several weeks ago with the military invasion of the Russian Federation into Ukrainian territory, has led to a situation which we are facing now in the Ukrainian region of Crimea. The actual situation is de facto military occupation by Russian troops. Once again, in legal sense, nothing had changed. In practical terms, we face a challenge of a part of the Ukrainian territory being occupied. And now the Ukrainian government is facing this challenge and preparing the adequate response to the situation we are facing. On the bad side is definitely the situation in Crimea itself, because it is complex, and as of today, it is unclear what may come out both economically on the humanitarian side and other logistical arrangements for exerting the rule of law in Crimea. On the positive side, we have an unprecedented international support which the Ukrainian government is enjoying. And I want to use this opportunity to extend Ukraine's government sincere gratitude to all our friends and partners around the world who were unanimous, with one or two exceptions not to be named, here in Foreign Correspondents Club, who supported the position of the Ukrainian government, the position of respect to international law, the position to the respect of the United Nations Charter, the position of the respect to basic international treaties and obligations, which were brutally breached by our immediate neighbor, Russian Federation. Specifically, since we are in Tokyo, I wanted also to extend my gratitude to the government of Japan, with which I have been working daily and nightly in the course of last several weeks. This morning we heard a statement by Mr. Suga, going in line with what we hear all around the world, to the effect of what happened yesterday in Crimea. We understand that it will be later today, according to the European time, that the foreign ministers of the European Union will meet at emergency session to think about what will happen next in the commitments the European Union had already taken vis-à-vis Russia's open aggression to Ukraine. So the situation is challenging. The situation had been described by a number of international officials as something which puts one single country, the member of the United Nations Security Council, in a position of actually vetoing the UN Charter, which in modern international relations is something more than extraordinary. For me, I won't say it is a big pleasure to accept the fact that my country has become the front of this huge upheaval in the whole system of international relations of today. But we may expect, I think, big challenges facing the world community, what we now call civilized and cooperative world, vis-à-vis brutal breach of fundamental rules of international behavior by the government of Russian Federation. I stress the government. Because we do not put the sign of equality between Russian government and the Russian people. Ukraine, historically, is a neighbor and a good friend of Russia. We saw dozens of thousands of Russian people recently protesting the crazy policy by the Russian government. We hope that we will remain friends with the Russian Federation, albeit the fact that today's policy of the Russian government effectively already afflicted a huge damage to traditional, good neighborly, friendly relationship between Ukrainians and Russians. We have a huge community of Russians living in Ukraine. Russia has huge community of Ukrainians living in Russia. We are neighbors. We will remain neighbors. We will overcome. I think the current situation is who and how will pay the price. And that is basically the issues which are confronting both the Ukrainian government, which is dealing with the situation in Crimea, and I think as of today also the world community. Because, as one commentator put it, now the Russian government is not only a pain in the back for Ukraine, but now it's a pain in the back to the whole civilized world. I'm sorry to be a bit emotional, but you may understand the feeling of the Ukrainian ambassador witnessing from a distant geographical locality, but anyway, current crisis in the Crimea provoked by our immediate neighbor. I will be more than happy to take as many questions as you may pose, and I will be trying to be as open and frank in responding to the, of course, to the best of my knowledge, because you understand the situation is developing, and it is developing hour by hour. I may lack some very recent information, which may come to the news lines in the course of the last 1 hour, hour and a half. But anyway, thank you for the invitation. I think I will stop my introductory remarks here and we'll be ready to pick up questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. And now we go to Q&A. The floor is open. Priority will go to working place, definitely. Please raise your hand, and when you're identified, come forward and introduce yourself. And initially, please remain yourself to one question, because I guess there will be many questions today. Yes, now it's open. Time for you to ask questions, ladies and gentlemen. It's quite surprising. Nobody is yet ready for the question. Yes, over there, yeah.
Patrick Zoll, Neue Zürcher Zeitung from Switzerland. The Japanese government is treading a very careful line when it comes to response to Russia, because, as we all know, they have an interest in improving ties because of the northern territories. Are you satisfied with the response by the Japanese government so far?
Thank you very much. I'm answering this question on a daily basis recently, and normally my response is the quote from the G7 statement of 12th March this year, which had been today once again confirmed by the cabinet in Japan, that the Japanese government stands together with other G7 nations in full condemnation of what had happened by the neglecting of all rules of international law by the Russian government. I'm also stressing the line in this G7 leaders' statement, which says the annexation of Crimea could have grave implications for the legal order that protects the unity and sovereignty of all states. Should the Russian Federation take such a step, we will take further action individually and collectively. I think we are exactly at the stage where this line in the common G7 statement is under scrutiny in the capitals. We already heard from some capitals. We definitely would expect that this line should be scrutinized also in this capital, the capital of one of the G7 countries. What kind of action further action could be taken is, of course, the responsibility of respective governments. What we feel in Ukraine is that, as the recent statement by the Foreign Ministry of Ukraine literally mentioned, I'm quoting, current Russian leadership has assumed personal responsibility for undermining the fundamental principles of international law and has transformed Russia into a personification of threats to international peace and security in the 21st century. Strong words. What we feel that way. And I think we feel the unanimous support of all our friends and partners around the world in these terms. Thank you.
Yes, floor is open. Yes, please.
Kobayashi, a freelance journalist. You don't recognize the referendum. I understand that. But it took place, actually. And I'd like to ask you how you could distinguish Crimea from Kosovo or from East Timor. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. The response would be brief. To have an effective referendum, you need to create a legal base for that referendum. Nothing of the kind has happened in Crimea, which is a strikingly different situation if compared to, you mentioned, Kosovo. Just on the margins, Ukraine had not recognized Kosovo, by the way, to be precise on that. In that terms, the legal, not only Ukrainian assessment, but international assessment, we are waiting for the official announcement from the Venice Commission of the Council of Europe, the highest legal body of the Council of Europe. We know the preliminary decision already. It is strikingly in unison with all what we hear around the world and what we hear from the Ukrainian Constitutional Court. There was no legal base for holding a referendum, and there could not be a legal base for holding a referendum specifically with the situation of open military invasion. So anything which can be argued to the other effect would practically follow the view of the Russian government, which we cannot accept. Thank you very much.
Yes, now again, next question, since nobody is asking. So, Fujita-san, yes.
My name is Fujita, and I'm at the Kokumin Shimbun founded in 1890 by Tokutomi Soho. Rather right-wing paper. Mm-hmm. According to the international rural engagement combat situation, the soldiers, military soldiers, must wear uniform, must clearly have the weapon, and must act under command, and also the military soldiers must wear national flag. Now, the military soldier-like people in Crimea, they're very dangerous because they do not act in accordance with the Hague International Rule Engagement. So if there's a common situation occurred, they must be killed, perhaps. But they don't have any. Even if they, surrender, they don't have it. They're not regarded as POW. So the situation, accident can happen. So I saw the situation is very dangerous. So I would like to hear your comment in this line item.
Thank you very much for this question. Yes, you're right. The nickname for those Russian soldiers in the Crimea as of several weeks now in Ukraine are, and I think around the world also, green people. According to international legislation, armed professionals not bearing insignia, not bearing national flags and everything, they should be considered mercenaries, and normally they should not be considered, well, an attribute of any nation. They are simply mercenaries. They could be killed at sight. I mean, frankly speaking. It is a great psychological tension, huge. We have heard voices coming from all international quarters praising the wisdom of Ukrainian military, Ukrainian defense forces, who do not react to numerous provocations exerted by those green people. I mean, it's not big secret who these green people are. I mean, they are Russians. Some of them openly accept that they are Russians. Number plates on their vehicles are Russian. We know basically who they are, where are they coming from. 5 places from out of Crimea, because part of that military is the military personnel of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, which is legally stationed in the Crimea, but another breach by Russian Federation was the breach of the agreement between Ukraine and Russia as for the formalities of stationing of that Russian Black Sea Fleet on the Ukrainian territory. Yesterday, I ran through a very interesting interview by the Ukraine's defense minister, who was asked whether he had contact with his Russian colleague, Mr. Shoigu. He said yes. We spoke on telephone. And the journalist was asking, did you ask him about Russian troops in the Crimea? Ukrainian minister said, yes. I asked what your people are doing there in Crimea. And the response was, we don't have Russian military in the Crimea. Now, Ukrainian minister was saying, look, but we know where they are coming from, and they accept that they are Russians. Well, the response to that was, we will think about it. I mean, it's kind of surrealistic conversation, I would say. All the world knows that they are Russians, but Russian government is not accepting that they are Russians. I think decision by the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian Defense Ministry to issue an order of not engaging in open hostilities with Russian troops in the Crimea is also influenced by the fact that Ukraine, which suffered insurmountable human losses in recent events in Ukraine, had decided to prevent further losses, both on Ukrainian and Russian side. Ukraine is a peaceful nation. We suffered more than enough, I think, recently. And new Ukrainian government, Ukrainian people who are supporting Ukrainian government do not want more casualties. The only thing we want is that the mentioning by Russian defense minister that we will think it over could happen rather in a speedy manner. Because de-aggravating the situation, in our view, would be an immediate withdrawal of Russian troops to the places of their permanent location, including of those military personnel of the Russian Black Sea Navy, which as of today is freely roaming around Crimea. Yes, you're right in your assessment of the fact of the legal status of those military, but as of today the fact is that mercenaries, according to international law, are effectively ruling the military logistics in Crimea. Thank you.
Yeah, Joel.
Hello, Joël Lejean from RTL France Broadcasting. Thank you for coming here, Ambassador. 3 questions, but because I think you can answer those things in the same time. First, it looks like there were some irregularities in the vote. Irregularities. There were some problems during the vote. Do you have any information about that? I heard Russians have voted also. So, I mean, could you tell us how the vote took place exactly? Second thing is, what do you expect from Europe, on this issue? There are discussions starting already. And also, what do you think is the advantage for Russia? I mean, it's going to be a heavy economical impact for them, I suppose, to have this new orientation. What do you expect for the Russian as a burden?
Last question, excuse me.
What impact do you think what is it going to be as an impact for the Russian? It's going to be heavy for the economy, I suppose.
Yeah. Thank you very much. First on the vote, irregularities. Once again, there was no legal vote. I mean, I ran through the news lines about that Crimean thing. And you know, the latest figure, I saw 95 point whatever. You know, our chairman mentioned that I used to be an academic at the Kiev University. I was born in the Soviet Union. I finished my school in the Soviet Union. I took my passport in the Soviet Union. National passport. I voted first time in my life during the time of the Soviet Union. I think that was vote for Supreme Soviet of the Soviet Union, the parliament, the Moscow parliament. I remember the figure of the vote, 99.9. 99.9. You know, that figure, I mean, total cast, was differing according to the republic. The lowest percentage always was in the Baltic republics. I remember it was not 99.9, but 99.6, 99.5, 99.4, and that was Soviet democracy in action. Now, the result of this so-called Crimean vote is, I mean, that's the reading from the newsline, is 95 point something. The figure, which had already been dubbed as already fixed several days ago in Moscow for that referendum, was 73, to show better running of democracy in Crimea. Now they decided to put 95, whatever. They could have put 107. Doesn't matter. Even official Russian speakers for the government once mentioned that the regime Russia has today is a manageable democracy. Manageable democracy. Ukraine is not. Ukraine was badly run democracy, but it was and still is a democracy. No normal democracy would accept this type of vote. So I am not talking about irregularities. The one I know was that Russian citizens, it was on the video on TV. We're just approached at the streets by polling people and casting votes just on the streets. I mean, that's manageable democracy, Russian standard. Thank you very much. We don't want such democracy in Ukraine. Now, what do we expect from the European Union? Again, it is, of course, the issue of the European governments to look at and to decide. We already enjoy full support of the European Union, both political, in terms of economic support for the Ukrainian government, which is now facing a big challenge of revitalizing national economy and make a stabilization effort for economy to restart running smoothly. As an official of the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry, I may only say that we expect from the European Union the adequate political and diplomatic response. Political and diplomatic response. Also, as already had been mentioned in the initial statements by European Union, economic sanctions are also at the table and could be looked at in the event that Russia is not rethinking its policy. I think economic sanctions is also the venue which could be specifically efficient in this situation. Now, as for advantages for Russia, I mean, political
economic impact.
Huh?
Economic impact.
Economic impact. I'm not a big economist, frankly speaking, but what I read and what I know is that Crimean economy is dependent, some figures show 90, some 95% on Ukraine. 95. Crimean economy is not profitable. It's dotational economy. I mean, what had already happened, and it's a devastating blow to Crimean economy, is that the tourist season, Crimea had always been famous for as a tourist destination for all former Soviet Union. Now it is ruined already. I mean, we hear complaints from tourist facilities that all reservations cancelled. I mean, some observers claim that there could be, well, not only huge economic problem, but also logistical problem and humanitarian crisis for people living in Crimea. I won't speculate on that. That's the issue which I may relate is under thorough consideration of the Ukrainian government today. Yesterday, the government of Ukraine had an emergency meeting and was looking also at these issues, how to deal with the situation of simply supporting population in the Crimea, because the current self-proclaimed so-called government in Crimea is openly leading this part of Ukraine to a very dire situation, to put it mildly. Ukraine stands ready to support. But first thing, political. Russian troops should go home. Thank you.
Okay, yes, gentleman over there.
My name is Furukawa. I'm from Nikkei. I have a couple of questions. First, he's talking about economic burden of Russia, and then I believe that Crimea is depending on supplying energy and then also water from mainland Ukraine. In case Russia decides to annex it, do you keep supplying? And secondly, I heard a couple of news about what's happening in the rest of Ukraine. In the east, there was a clash, and then a couple of people died. And then there was also information yesterday, Russian troops tried to invade other region nearby Crimea. Could you tell us your information, what's going on in the rest of Ukraine? And once again about the reaction from Japanese government. When EU and the US is now discussing economic sanction, Japan is going to have an economic forum with Russia, I believe tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Are you really satisfied with the reaction from the Japanese government? Thank you.
Will Ukrainian government, or label it Ukraine, continue to supply electricity, water, gas, and whatever to Crimea? That's the first part of your question. I think yesterday that exactly was one of the questions which had been discussed at the emergency meeting of the Ukrainian government. That is by far the only thing which I may refer now. Second, events which you have been mentioning took place a couple of days ago. Yes, we had clashes in Donetsk, we had clashes in Kharkiv. In Donetsk case, we had 2 people killed by Russian provocateurs, basically. As of last 24 hours, once again, I was referring to the development current. As for last 24 hours, we didn't hear anything to the effect that more casualties were coming from some hotspots in the east. What we heard is the statement by the head of the National Security Council of Ukraine, Mr. Parubi, several hours ago, who spoke about actually averting the large-scale provocation by extremist pro-Russian forces, which normally are on the margins in Ukraine. I mean, nothing exceeding. I mean, they don't have representatives in the national parliament, in local parliament. I think they only have representation in Crimea, but that last percentage of openly pro-Russian extremist parties was, I think, 5 or 6, even in Crimea. So it's heavily overplayed by Russian media. So Mr. Parubi, the head of the National Security Council, referred to the aversion of the plan to steer trouble in 8 regions of Ukraine by pro-Russian forces, led by Russian so-called political tourists, which were sent through Ukrainian borders. In the course of the last 5 days, Ukrainian border is almost closed, and suspicious Russian political tourists are being stopped and sent back. But about 1,000 of them are on the territory of Ukraine. Once again, as of last 24 hours, they wanted to steer more trouble in Donetsk, but so far we don't have any information that this steering trouble had succeeded. So situation is under control. Now, last point, Japanese government. Yes, economic forum. I hope Japanese government is thinking also about this timing, which is quite unlucky for Russian-Japanese Economic Forum, and for other possible steps which may be taken by the Japanese government along the lines of what had been agreed within the G7 format. If you ask me personally, definitely I am not very much happy, because I am receiving calls from Ukrainians living here and working here. What shall we do, they ask, with this Russian-Japanese Economic Forum? I reserve the right not to reply on what I am telling them. Thank you very much.
Yes, please.
Charge d'Affaires of Syrian Arab Republic. Thank you, Ambassador, for briefing us on this important situation. My question with regard to the decision taken by the Ukraine Parliament on 15th of March, before the referendum, they dissolved the Crimea Council, Supreme Council. And the reason, so my question, how it is easy or so quick can the Ukrainian Parliament take such important decision? And what is the reason behind dissolving the Crimea Supreme Council? Thank you.
I think the reason is obvious. The Crimean Parliament several weeks ago started to act in breach of Crimean constitution, Ukrainian constitution, and all the attempts of approaching the leadership of the Crimean Parliament by the Ukrainian Parliament and Ukrainian government, they actually were neglected by Crimean Parliament. Instead, the delegation of the Crimean Parliament fled to Moscow to receive instructions. After that, the change of the setting for the so-called referendum had taken place. And in this situation, it was decided by the Ukrainian Parliament, which is the highest authority on all territory of Ukraine, that the leadership of the Crimean Parliament actually acted in an unconstitutional way, which undermines the territorial integrity and constitutional order of Ukraine. Decision was taken by a majority vote, so what we have today is actually the effective disbandment of the current composition of the Crimean Parliament. Thank you.
Yes.
Siegfried Little, freelancer from Germany. Former US security advisor Kissinger made last week in the Washington Post, wrote an article with a plan to how to deal with Ukraine. He said 3 points. One is the Finlandization of Ukraine, because it's in the rest of Russia have some kind of security interests, and with Europe, and they have to deal with this kind of interest. The second is a federal state solution for Ukraine, because for Ukraine exists on many different
different region with a more close region, more close to Russia, more as a region more close to how and a federal state could better deal with this different interests. And third is a strong, very strong autonomy for Crimea, like more a solution like Catalonia or Basque in Spain or southern Tyrol in Italy. How do you think about this plan?
Thank you very much. I pay big reverence in Henry Kissinger, and this idea of Finlandization also was mentioned by a good friend of mine, Zbigniew Brzezinski, in one of his comments. Listen, I will respond to the last. Autonomy for Crimea. According to current Ukrainian constitution and Crimean constitution, Crimea has such amount of autonomy, already has, that, I mean, if run properly, Crimea would have been top tourist destination in this part of the world. It has autonomy. Widest autonomy possible, already. Now, the Ukrainian government, the new one, confirmed that if they want in Crimea more autonomy, everything is open. The point is not Finlandization and federalization, no. Point is both Finlandization or whatever, Japanization, if I may, or Germanization, or, I don't know, Polonization, is not damned Mr. Putin's business. It's our business. And we will think about that ideas after Mr. Putin takes his troops back home. That's the point. On federalization. It would be interesting for you to know that the first idea of federalization of Ukraine was brought to existence back in 1992, immediately after independence of Ukraine, by no one else than the then leader of the Ukraine's popular movement, which led to the independence of Ukraine, now dead, Mr. Chernovil, nationalist. His idea was that historically Ukraine, some claim, consists of 7, some claim consists of 9, specifically different regions. Yes, we are a diverse country. I mean, people in the East speak more Russian. People in the far West speak very weird language which I, Ukrainian coming from the center, from Kiev, will not understand. Because it's a local dialect, but I mean, it's a big country, it's 46 million people. But it was decided back then in 1992 that Ukraine should remain a unitary state and Crimea should be granted big autonomy because that region is really specific. It has complex history. It claimed that it wanted to be autonomous. It got that autonomy. So I think basic, once again, point here is, whatever talks of what choice of finding the best affiliations for Ukraine in terms of engaging in international security institutions, economic institutions, choosing alliances, if I may, is the sovereign matter of Ukrainian government. And the organization of Ukrainian life inside Ukraine is solely and purely a matter for the Ukrainian government, not any other government, neither Russian, nor American, nor French, nor German. It's solely Ukrainian business. That is a mild reply to the ideas of whatever may solve the current crisis over Crimea. Very simple thing may solve the current crisis in Crimea. Sending Russian troops back. Send them back, crisis will be solved in a matter of days. Thank you very much.
Yes, Joel wanted to ask some few more questions.
Sorry, Joel Lejean again on RTL France. As a European myself, I'm seeing again what I've seen in Yugoslavia. And we have here ambassador from Bosnia, Greece. I wonder if what we see right now is just that finally the international community didn't care about what was happening this weekend, as it didn't care much what happened in former Yugoslavia. So what is the scenario ahead? We talk about federalization. What is Putin's dream? And should Europe be a bit more aware of it and more decisive? Or as in the Yugoslavian crisis, we're going to have to wait that the US send soldiers to resolve it?
Thank you very much. I also think of myself as a European. Geographically, it was Austro-Hungarian geographers who counted 7 geographical centers of Europe some 100 years ago. So it happened that one of these geographical centers of Europe stands in the territory of Ukraine, in its westernmost part, in the Transcarpathian region. So geographically, not a single square meter of Ukrainian soil lies anywhere else than Europe. It's Europe. And it's Central Europe. Now, what's on Putin's mind? It's a good question. I think I'm not the only one who is playing guessing game. What really is in Putin's mind? Because, well, I may have a view on this. If you want, I may share it with you. One international official put it recently, several days ago, Mr. Putin, you are on the wrong side of history. My view is that Mr. Putin has learned perfectly well the history, the so-called short history of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the Stalin's history textbook, which was putting everything in order for history. I think that Mr. Putin still thinks that Soviet Union exists, that it had not collapsed 22 years ago. I think Mr. Putin still thinks that he is the Secretary General of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, who may put his clients in the republics around to control them. What I may say, it's bad learning of history. And Ukraine is for 22 years no more a republic of the former Soviet Union. It is an independent state, and it wants to be in Europe. Of course, at the background of that thinking, we would expect that Europe, which is embodied in the European Union today, would act adequately in response to current policies by Russian government. I fully share your concern about the feeling that sometimes international reaction is a bit slower than should be expected, as we've seen in some places, including in Europe. I think it's good time today that international response is firm, fast, and resolute. Because if you ask me as a professor of international relations, I would say that this open military invasion and annexation in the year 2014 is not only about Ukraine. It's about the whole world security architecture created after the Second World War. It's outrageous. What we've seen yesterday in the Security Council, it immediately brings questions. Is the Security Council still relevant today? Is it not a good time to rethink the validity of the Security Council? If one of the members of the Security Council behaves in such manner, what else can international community propose to deal with challenges? And this challenge, annexation, comes not from modern world. We have other challenges on world agenda today, bigger global challenges. Not that 19th or 20th century challenges, territories, whatever, protecting of languages, whatever. That kind of argument were popular in some parts of Europe back 80 years ago. One leader of that time, under the very same pretext, took the part of one country. I won't go much into detail how that leader ended and what happened to Europe after that. Ukraine stands ready to stop that craziness. We feel support now. But yes, I agree that sometimes we feel that the support is coming slower than we may expect. Thank you.
Okay, do you have some time? Because
yes, please.
Yes. Okay, one more question we can entertain. Yes, please.
My name is Shimada from Tokyo Shimbun. Let me ask about the language issue, a linguistic issue. In Ukraine, there are several ethnic minorities, such as Hungarian, Moldovan, and Romanian, besides the big Russian population. Mm-hmm. And so how did they react to the law? I mean, a law on principles of state language policy it adopted by the Ukrainian parliament 2 years ago. In August 2012, the Ukrainian parliament adopted the law on principles of state language policy. And the parliament voted to abolish the law in January. So how did those ethnic minorities react to the move? You understand my question?
Roughly, yes.
Thank you.
Roughly, yes. Thank you very much. Now, to put it in short, as of today, yes, Ukraine is ethnically a very diverse country. We have, well, with the majority of the population being ethnic Ukrainians, we have second biggest majority is Russians, average up to 11% of the total. We have big ethnic groups of, well, Romanians, Moldovans, Hungarians, Tatars, Jews, Armenians, Belarusians. I mean, more than 100 ethnic groups. More than 100 ethnic groups. Very diverse country. The state language of Ukraine as of today is one. This is Ukrainian. All other languages spoken, Hungarian, Romanian, whatever, Tatar, Russian. Russian definitely is the second most widely used language in Ukraine. Is a matter, I mean, I must admit that in the course of years, this language issue was systematically overplayed by politicians. Systematically. Because for an average Ukrainian, irrespective which ethnicity this Ukrainian is representing, matter of language is a matter of culture, primarily. We are normally, historically, we are a bilingual country. You know, bilingual country is much more flexible and mild in terms of languages. I mean, you hear Russian, you respond in Russian. You hear Ukrainian, you respond in Ukrainian. You hear English, if you are in a good command of English, you respond in English. I didn't hear anything substantially important to the effect that national minorities, ethnic minorities in Ukraine, reacted in some politically visible and important manner to the current language situation in Ukraine. No. The issue of language had become a political tool, if I may, for some political parties to gain more votes, because in the East people tend to speak more Russian. Problem is, if you ask me once again, those people in the East who speak Russian, they don't want to learn Ukrainian. Albeit in the West, people speaking Ukrainian, they switch to Russian immediately when they are being asked. So that is how it works. Now, a week ago, I think, or 10 days ago, we had a very interesting experiment. The Western cultural capital of Ukraine, the city of Lviv, which is Ukrainian speaking, had decided that it will speak Russian the whole day long, in all broadcasting, in communicating, and Donetsk, the industrial capital of the East, had decided that it will speak Ukrainian whole day long to show the unity of the nation. That language is nothing. Language is cultural. We can understand each other. And we don't need Russians to teach us which language we should be speaking. It's easy. Once again, there is no problem of language. There is a problem of military invasion and occupation of part of the Ukrainian territory by Russian troops, which should be solved. So far, there were no open hostilities. But as of yesterday, we heard from the National Defense that the troops are combat ready and Ukraine's territorial integrity would be secured. That is an encouraging statement coming from our defense sector, and Ukrainian people are standing behind the Ukrainian government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency, Ambassador Ihor Kharchenko. Our usual practice is to offer guest speakers 1 year guest membership. So as an ambassador, you are supposed to be already a member, but your membership card has not yet been issued. So meanwhile, since it has not yet been issued, I'm offering you this on behalf of the club, this honorary membership.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please do come back again. Do come back. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Here we end today's press conference. Thank you for joining.